Hello and welcome. I am Charla Griffy-Brown, Professor of Information Systems and Technology Management at the Grazie Dio School of Business, and I'm very pleased to have with me today a former executive of Alaska Airlines, Mr. Ed White, who is the current owner of Novo Consulting, a firm specializing in strategic planning, facilitation, and leadership coaching. Mr. White had a 39-year career with Alaska Airlines. It's my privilege to introduce Mr. Ed White. Welcome.
Thank you, Charla. It's good to be back at Pepperdine.
I neglected to mention that Mr. Ed White is an alumni of our executive MBA program here at Pepperdine. So we are delighted to have him back here to teach us more about being an executive, and particularly in today's business environment, which has experienced a tremendous amount of turbulence. So Ed, what are the big questions that companies should ask to remain competitive?
I think companies need to deal with the obviously the rapidly changing environment that they operate in, and the ability to look inside themselves. Obviously, they can't ignore competition in their external environment, but what leaders can control primarily is internal. And so looking at yourself, asking the difficult questions, asking, as Jim Collins puts it, asking the brutal fact, or looking at the brutal facts and facing those, and then engaging people to perform and to overcome those challenges. I think that's, in a very large umbrella sense, that's what companies are facing right now.
I love this term, the brutal facts, and I think it's really difficult for employees to actually do this, and for executives to sometimes put out there the brutal facts or even face them. So I would love to understand more about how you do that.
Well, it's not an easy process. It starts with creating a climate where that's okay, and that takes involvement from not only the top leadership, but all of the leadership, because it requires confidence. It requires risk-taking, and you're putting yourself out there personally to say, is this idea that I have, or this process that I have been supporting for years, is it time to discard it? And or any other input that's going to come from employees. Frontline employees are the greatest source of input and recognition of those brutal facts, but they're not going to share those if they don't trust the leadership, or if they don't have confidence that it's going to be used constructively. And creating that environment is not something that you can dictate into place. It takes a lot of time, a lot of cultivation of the environment, so that there's trust and respect and some humility, and then the tenacity and the perseverance to say, okay, let's get in and get our hands dirty and deal with the challenges.
So it sounds like leadership is important, but it also has to be deliberate. It has to be a deliberate process, goal, culture that's put in place in order for this to happen.
Absolutely. I think leadership really focuses around people, obviously by definition. But people are going to be very careful about their interactions with leaders. And I believe that, competent people who are positively motivated, who work for leaders that they have respect for and that they can trust, are going to produce success. But every one of those elements takes a lot of effort to put in place. And one leader or one series of incidents with folks can set you back tremendously in terms of your front lines employees' dependence on you.
Wow. And I know in your experience you've probably seen all sides of this, when it's done well, when it's not done so well. And I'm curious about this Airport of the Future process that you put into place. It really revolutionized the way we travel in many ways at a very difficult time. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about why this worked, what went right, and some of the things that were challenges in putting that together.
Yeah, the Airport of the Future project, the Airport of the Future team, was really exciting. It has to be one of the most enjoyable and just exciting opportunities that I had an opportunity to be involved in. And I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to that to our CEO at the time, John Kelly. And it was his vision to approach the issue, but he did it with conviction. I mean, he was invested fully. So he wanted innovation. He wanted us to take risk. And he was willing to, if you will, put his money where his mouth was. And so he invested by having us, a team selected, spending the time, and then encouraging us to make mistakes, to fail. And we had a specific goal. Our goal that was given to this Airport of the Future team was to move the customer through the airport with the least stress, the quickest way possible. So it was very focused on getting a customer from the front door to the aircraft door. And how do we remove obstacles or remove things that created anxiety for employees? And John had a real passion for technology. He was the spearhead behind the work that had happened with our website being developed, by the electronic ticketing development that Alaska pioneered for the industry. And so he had a passion for technology. So he was bringing an assumption that technology was going to help improve the customer's experience at the airport. What was exciting about it was we didn't focus on technology. We started there because that was the first assumption. What we got to very quickly was looking at process. And it was a trial and error effort. And looking at the underlying business processes, we were able to eliminate a lot of process. Because I think that's one of the traps in technology innovation, is that if the underlying process is bad, then the technology just allows you to do more of it or do it more quickly, and that's seldom a good thing. But if you improve that process and then say, now with this efficient and effective process, is there technology that can help us, or that can support us, or that can make it possible? And that's where our group had the opportunity to try some things, test some things, fail at a lot of them, but ultimately come up with something that, in my opinion, is revolutionary for this industry. This industry is slow to adapt new things. But I think the time has shown, experience has shown, that what Alaska is implementing from the Airport of the Future product is an absolute stunning success. Millions of customers are confirming that and voting with their feet, if you will.
You make it sound so easy, but it's really hard to blow up a process, particularly when it's something that an industry or a firm has done for a long, long time. How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you start innovation? And how do you keep it going? I mean, that's the big question. And again, it gets back to what I said earlier. It takes some cultivation. You have to have an environment where there is some belief and trust with the whole team, leadership, frontline, support teams, and then there needs to be a purpose. If there isn't a purpose, or actually a sense of urgency that we have to do this, when that is in place, then there's the right seeds for innovation. I've actually tried things where you incentivized people to innovate or to come up with new ideas, and monetarily, and it's the wrong motivation, because it gets the person focused on what they're being motivated for, which is to earn some money. But if they're motivated to fix a business problem or to provide an unprovided customer benefit that's never been done, that's what I've seen gets people's juices flowing. So you need a purpose, and then a sense of urgency, and then it's focused on value. Does this innovation provide value, and does it take care of a problem or provide an opportunity for customers? And when you have that, then it starts feeding on itself. To allow it to continue, though, really requires this element of supporting failure. And that's where I think so many companies or individuals struggle, because failure is not something we typically embrace. And again, we were fortunate in our environment that we had a leader who said it and meant it and demonstrated it through action. We put a couple practical things in place. We had in essence, we had a budget for our failure so that the external audience could be relieved that we weren't putting the company at risk with this innovation or this risk taking. We were putting a fixed amount of money at risk, and it was viewed as seed money or development money, and put in that context, it kind of eliminated the concern from that perspective. The other risk is in rejection. And so we were looking at innovation that was going to affect customers and affect employees. And so what was very important is to deal with what potential rejection might occur. And so there was a heavy involvement of frontline employees and customers as we went through this development process. They went through the failures with us, and they helped us identify the things that really weren't going to work or that were not practical or weren't sustainable. And that created this environment that innovation could flourish and could experiment with things that weren't going to work but might lead you to a new learning.
Wow. So there's a couple of things that I think are fascinating there. One is this idea of an environment that not only enables failure, but encourages you to learn from it. I've heard an executive say, fail early, fail often, if you want to innovate and learn from that. And you also mentioned this idea of purpose, and purpose being important. So I'm interested in your thoughts as an executive on value-centered leadership and profitability that is principled. And what role do you see that playing in an environment where companies can ultimately be successful? Do you think that's an important element of long-term or short-term success?
Well, I think what's important is that a company commits itself to long-term success. Mm-hmm. You can do a lot of things short-term that are not sustainable and are not right, or they're not in everyone's best interest. A company has three stakeholders. It has its customers, it has shareholders or owners of some kind, and then it has employees. And you have to nourish all three of those. And oftentimes companies leave out the employee piece, or they have a very cold or employee unfriendly approach. Mm. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't that you don't have to deal with some pretty hard employee issues. Alaska had to deal with some very serious employee issues. But if you do it with a transparency that says, here's our rationale, here are the underlying reasons, and this action or this difficult choice is in the best interests of the company, of all three stakeholders. Because without investors, a company isn't going to continue. Mm-hmm. Without customers, an employee isn't going to continue. But without the support of employees, it's not going to be viable. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be an equal amount of investment, if you will, into each one of those stakeholders. Balancing that is hard. I mean, Wall Street creates its pressure, customer advocates create their pressures, and then there's the employee issue. And what are you going to do with that? And it's easy for leaders with a short-term focus to just put that aside, because you can do some things that can get you success with customers and success with shareholders for the short term, but they're not sustainable. In this case, back to our Airport of the Future case, by having employees engaged in it, what we found when we moved to the implementation stage, the employees who had been involved already owned it. Mm-hmm. And so they were in no way going to let that fail. And so with any implementation, there's difficulties. But when they occurred with this, the employees were motivated that it wasn't Ed's or the Airport of the Future's team's product. This is mine. Mm-hmm. And so I am going to make sure this succeeds. And so they got it over the tough spots, the rough spots, the getting other people engaged and bought into it. And that was very critical to the success of that program. And I think if you think about it, probably the most innovation that is implemented that affects employees and customers, you get their buy-in, they're going to support it. Mm-hmm.
So how do you keep innovation going, Ed? How do you, if you've reached a milestone and you've done something disruptive, how do you keep it going?
I think you have to go back to the same things you used to get it started. To keep it going, there has to be a purpose. To do innovation for innovation's sake, I think in many companies, at least in our case, that's hard to envision how you can sustain that. Now, maybe there's certain manufacturing or high-tech development that you just need to keep innovating and it will find a purpose. But a service industry, or I think many manufacturing industries, there has to be a purpose for the innovation to get the right motivation from the people who are engaged in it. And then it's the same recipe. It's having the people who are invested in the outcome participating on the input, focusing on value, and then just being relentless in looking at what are the processes, where does this lead us? And I think there's a certain amount of rabble rousing that you need to foster. It can't be destructive, and it obviously can't be hurtful, but there needs to be a little irreverence to attack some of the givens that, our company at the time this was created was 65, 70 years old. So there's a lot of entrenched tradition and very strong culture, and you can't just ignore that. And so by having that focus, you can get the engagement from the people who are going to drive the result, and it will feed on itself. They'll sustain it, because in our case, it's a 7/24 operation. So there's something happening every hour of every day. And so if you have to be there to oversee it for it to work, it's not gonna, it won't sustain. But if everyone has the more vested ownership they have, the more likely that it's going to continue and improve and expand forward and create the kind of value or benefit that the customers will experience and that employees will feel proud that they're a part of. People want to be part of a winning team.
Mr. White, could you tell me a little more about the challenges that companies might face? What are the 5 perils or mines you would caution new leaders to avoid as they try to capture new value through innovation?
Arrogance. That's a great question, because, again, I think having this climate where you are trying to foster doing what hasn't been done. I mean, innovation by definition is doing something that a whole bunch of other people couldn't figure out. So it's not an automatic. Using our experience, I think that it was very key that you don't focus on solutions first. You have to find, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve? We went into it with the mindset that, okay, we want to find the use of technology to speed up the airport process. And so we had a preconceived idea that technology was it. And so we took different pieces of technology, and we ended up very laughingly at ourselves saying, okay, we've got a solution in search of a problem. and you can find places to apply it, but you may not find the breakthrough innovation because you're limited by whatever that solution can bring. Whereas if you're focusing on the underlying processes or issues or problems, that's going to be better. I mentioned earlier, you need to support a degree of, whether you call it don't shoot the messenger, but you need to really cultivate dissension. And yet it has to be respectful and constructive. Now, it's difficult to find people who are real good at both. And you can get the rabble-rouser who can shoot down everything, and you can get people who will be respectful and polite, and it's often 2 different people. And so getting them on the same team, and maybe use the respectful individual to be kind of the filter outside the group to the rest of the audience. Don't leave employees. Or if it's the people who are responsible for the output, don't leave that employee group or that operating group out of the development and the input. And they might need help in kind of creating a framework or a beta test or whatever, but they need to be involved, or you're going to have a real mountain to climb with the buy-in and the support. and customers. Again, if this is going to be a customer-facing thing, I think it's rare to have a product or service innovation that's put in place that's wildly successful that wasn't tested on customers or really driven by some kind of customer input. And then lastly, and this was a kind of a personal thing for me, you cannot underestimate the importance and value of communication. Communication to your team, communication to the other stakeholders in the company, communication to customers, and you have to do it over and over and over again. And as the team leader, I was constantly finding myself fixated on what are we doing, where are we going, and they don't need to know about this. And that created challenges for me personally and for our team. And having that open, very honest and transparent communication so that it would build trust, but it would also just create information for people. And your furthest removed constituents could buy into the process and be a supporter in areas that you didn't anticipate, but because they were in the communication loop, they could. And I think that's a very important piece to bring to it. So it's creating the climate, recognizing the value of the employees, the people that are involved, and then the power of communication.
Outstanding. So can you tell me a little bit more about risk and innovation? How do you deal with risk in the context of innovation, and how do you get senior executives involved?
Yeah, having senior executives involved in fostering innovation is critical. In our case, we had the support of the senior executive, the CEO. And that was invaluable, and I think it's just absolutely vital for that to occur. But I think it's also helpful for the student, anyone else in the organization, to not be discouraged by that fact of saying, well, okay, my CEO doesn't support it. You have the opportunity somewhere within some span to create a mini version of that. And you can create within your span of control opportunities for your employees or your projects to experience and celebrate failure. And you have to protect them, because if your company doesn't have a culture that supports that, then you need to give them very good cover so that that doesn't put them at risk. But then what you can do with that is you can look for the opportunities to teach up. And if you report to the CEO, if you report to a vice president, you report to somebody. And if you have an opportunity to say, hey, Ed, look, we had this opportunity, we tried this, it didn't work, but here's what we learned. And by showing the positive product of a failure, the learning and what it set up for the next attempt, you are starting to educate somebody about the benefits of failure. And they might not bite right away. They might not ever bite, but you're creating that opportunity to maybe start percolating up the concept of supporting failure or supporting the learning process. And maybe in a different company or a different environment, it just needs to have different labels so it doesn't sound negative, but it's still facing the fact. And if you can do that, then you free up the intellectual power from a much wider group of people to say, well, what if we try this? And they will offer ideas that maybe won't work. But if you got 50 that didn't and one that was the breakthrough, you're light years ahead in terms of creating value for the company or for the customer or the shareholder or the employee, for somebody. And that's the exciting opportunity that anybody has in an organization. Everyone has some span of control that they can recreate that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. White, for joining us. We really appreciate your time and teaching us more about innovation and disruption and how that can happen in the context of a company that has a legacy and a very strong culture, and how that can be transmuted into other companies, and how we can become more innovative in the business environment and face the challenges that are very real today. We really appreciate all that you are bringing to our students, and we look forward to future collaboration. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Charla. It's been a pleasure.